Coming up, the Mikal Bridges trade is complete and the Brooklyn Nets are officially in a full rebuild. I recap the deal and talk about some of what the Nets have to look forward to this offseason before Ian Eagle joins the pod to talk about some untold Net stories and his legendary broadcasting career. All that and more after the theme music. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. As always, big thanks to all of you for listening. If you don't already, make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Also, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater. Smash that like button. Leave a 5-star review if you can. That really goes a long way. But I just recorded a great interview with Ian Eagle talking about a lot of stuff having to do with some untold Net stories, his broadcasting career, and some of what's happening with the team right now. But before we get to that, just want to talk a little bit about the recent developments with the Brooklyn Nets. It has been 2 weeks since the Mikal Bridges trade, but it was officially announced on Saturday. There were minor additions made to the deal to ensure that the Knicks were not hard capped at the first apron. So in addition to Bojan Bogdanovic, 5 first-round picks, 1 first-round pick swap, and a second-round pick. The Nets also acquired Shake Milton on a sign and trade. They gave him a 3-year contract, but only the first year is guaranteed. So basically, it's a 1-year deal at about $3 million. And they also acquired Mamadi Diakite while sending Keita Bates-Diop to New York. So nothing really significant there, mostly just, fill-in fodder to get the financials in order. But Sean Marks did speak to the media for the first time since the trade on Monday. And, for a guy who holds things typically very tight to the vest, I thought that Sean was pretty candid and pretty open in some of the responses that he gave. And, the main takeaway from his press conference was that he felt that the Knicks offer and that this trade was far and away the best deal to set up the Nets moving forward, to set up them for sustainable success and sustainable build, which is something that he and Joe Tsai had been talking about leading up to this. And, given that it was the best deal, he was not going to be scared away by the fact that it was the Knicks and a crosstown rival. And while, I think everybody would agree that it was a stunning deal and the optics of sending your top player to a crosstown rival, elevating them to a, contender for a few years to come while kind of jettisoning yourself into irrelevance, it's difficult optically. But to Sean's credit, to Joe Tsai's credit, to the entire Nets organization's credit, it was the right basketball move and the right team building move. And they were not going to be, scared away from making it because of optics or because of what anybody thought. So, that's how they were approaching it. And, Sean said that the deal came together fairly quickly. And he was also adamant that Mikal Bridges did not request a trade to the Knicks. Now, I had Ian Begley on here last week, and he is the one who reported shortly after news of the deal broke that Bridges told Brooklyn that he wanted to go to New York and that he was willing to force his way there. He was willing to play hardball and kind of leverage himself and tell other prospective trade partners with Brooklyn that he only wanted to play for New York. Now, Bridges and Sean Marks have since both denied this, but, when I talked to him and on his own time since, Begley has stood by his reporting. Now, there may be some debate about this. Did Bridges request a trade? Did he not request a trade? The bottom line here is Mikal Bridges is very, very happy with this outcome. And he's very, very happy to be with his former Villanova teammates on the Knicks, playing in a city, a team that's a toast of a town and is a perennial title contender, it seems like, for the next few years. Everybody knew that he wanted to go to the Knicks. Last season, he got some hate from Nets fans for the podcast appearances, not standing up for the Nets when Josh Hart was clowning him and the organization repeatedly. And, some suspected that that's where he wanted to go. And logically, we all knew on some level that that's where he wanted to go. And that's where he ended up, whether by, his own doing, a push from his side or not. He's there. And it's ultimately an outcome that I think we can all agree that he wanted on some level and that he has no qualms with now at this point. So that's kind of how I'm seeing that. And now for the Nets, Sean Marks finds himself, somewhat back where he started. I mean, this is a guy who inherited a Nets team in 2016 with none of their first round picks and virtually little to no talent. And he built, it up to a contender in less than 4 seasons. And he'll attempt to do that again. Only now he has 15 first round picks over the next 7 years. He'll have a boatload of cap space to work with next summer, and he can roll that cap space over to 2026 and the years after that, however he chooses. And most importantly, he executed the deal with the Houston Rockets, and he has control of his own draft picks in 2025 and 2026. So this is an extremely different situation than we saw the first time around. And I think that's encouraging for Nets fans because Sean Marks did a hell of a job the first time around without any of these luxuries. And, we know how he did that. He, traded for a cast-off like D'Angelo Russell. He found diamond in the rough signings from the G League like Joe Harris and Spencer Dinwiddie. He moved off veterans like Bojan Bogdanovic and Thaddeus Young for picks that turned into Jared Allen and Karis LeVert. He brought in other veterans, like Damari Carroll on signing dumps, salary dumps while getting more draft picks. And, all of those maneuvers will be in the playbook again this time around. But he also has the luxury of, having all these extra picks, having this cap space. And like I said, most importantly, being able to go into a tank and try to land a franchise-altering talent in the draft this year. And make no mistake, Sean talked about it during his press conference. The overall talent level in the 2025 and 2026 draft classes played a role in Sean and the Nets' organization's decision to pivot to a rebuild, to trade Mikal Bridges and go down this road, because the Nets now have an opportunity to land a top prospect like a Cooper Flagg, like an Ace Bailey. There's other guys, Dylan Harper, VJ Edgecombe, Nolan Trower. There's a lot of guys in this class that have franchise-altering potential, the top of which the prize that would make this trade to the Knicks, sending Bridges to the Knicks, all worth it very quickly, would be landing that first overall pick and landing Cooper Flagg, because Cooper Flagg, I think all of you know, the 17-year-old phenom who's heading to Duke next season, but he was recently selected to the USA Select team, which participates in training camp and scrimmages against the Olympic team, which is one of the best basketball teams ever assembled. It's up for debate, definitely. They could go right up against the dream team, in my opinion. And he's been playing against those players. This is a 17-year-old playing against Hall of Fame caliber players and looks extremely comfortable. And, the select team features numerous, guys who could be future all-stars like Brandon Miller, Keegan Murray, Jabari Smith, amongst others. There's a lot of good players. And I think it was Mark Spears who tweeted out that he spoke to one NBA head coach at training camp, and he said that coach thought that Cooper Flagg was the best player on the select team. And that is saying a lot for a 17-year-old who we all know his potential, but to be better than those NBA guys who are high-level rotation players already in the eyes of this one NBA head coach, that is something, man. And I tweeted out some of the sequences before this. I don't want to go too long on Flagg, but he had a sequence where he came down. He's being guarded by Drew Holiday. He initiates comfortably. He creates space. He gets a switch onto Anthony Davis, two of the best defenders in the league on this possession, and he goes hezzy and he pulls up for a three and splashes it, then gets a steal and a deflection in transition and goes down, get ahead pass, runs the floor, put back and one over Bam Adebayo. So that's just a glimpse into this 6'9", phenom that could be the prize of the 2025 draft. But, talking about, the tank this year, the Nets are going into a tank, and, talking about that, they still have some work to do. And I think everybody expected once this Bridges trade was made, a lot of attention quickly went to the veterans on this Nets roster. And that's guys like Cam Johnson. Now it's Bojan Bogdanovic, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder. Those are the four guys. But guys that, should be on the move, if not now, at some point before the trade deadline, because the Nets still need to maximize their chances of this top pick. And I know a lot of people say, the odds are basically the same of the top three, in terms of the worst records, all of the same odds of the top three. But it is important, if you land that top pick, it's something that I want to clarify. If you have the worst record in the league, the worst pick that you can get in the draft is 5th. And if you have the second worst record, the worst you can get is 6th. Third worst record, the worst you can get is 7th. So the further down you go there, it raises the floor of, where your pick is going to be, or the ceiling of your pick, where it's going to be, however you want to say that, the worse your record is. So, this is a Nets team that, I think we'd all agree is one of the worst rosters in the league, but there's still enough on this team where they have a little bit more work to do if they're going to maximize their chances at a player like Cooper Flagg, or to floor at a player like a guy like VJ Edgecombe, and somebody who's the, say the fifth best player in that draft class. So they have more work to do there. It may not come during, this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it did. But, a guy like Cam Johnson has 3 more years left on his deal. They could wait to see, where the window for the best value is there. I think the guy who's most likely to be on the move soon is Dorian Finney-Smith, who's entering the final year of his deal at $14 million or close to $15 million before a player option in 2025-26. So he's a guy that the Nets have held on to for, since they acquired him at the 2023 trade deadline through 3 transaction cycles. And now they're getting to a point where they're running out of time to, recoup value for him, whatever they can get. And it's also now there's a benefit to doing that outside of just what you're getting back of furthering the tank. So, the Nets are in this path. They're in it now. This is the direction they're going. It's not up for debate whatsoever. And because of that, I think it's pretty obvious what the fate of some of these veterans may be and how some of the roster moves could shake out over the next few weeks. But that is, all I want to touch on what's going on with the Nets currently. I want to get to the interview with Ian. Hope you guys really enjoy it. He's one of the best in the business and just a staple of the Nets organization for 3 decades now. So hope you guys enjoy the talk. Today's guest really needs no introduction. He's the voice of the Nets, March Madness, NBA on TNT, NFL on CBS, and more. Ian Eagle, thanks for joining me, man.
Erik, my pleasure. Great to see you. Great to see you in your summer vibe. I think there's always been a misconception with me that my skin couldn't tan, which I'm now proving you that it can. And then secondly, that I didn't own any V-necks, that I only own shirt and tie combinations.
Really?
But summer months, this is a whole different vibe.
This is a rarity. I'm getting tan hip Ian Eagle on the podcast here. So there we go. But Ian, it's been a loud past 2 weeks for the Nets. Want to get into some current stuff before we talk a little bit more about your career. Obviously, the Nets shook the NBA about 2 weeks ago. It is now sending Mikal Bridges to the New York Knicks for a monstrous package of 5 first-round picks, a pick swap, a second-round pick, amongst some other stuff. Just where were you when you saw the news of this deal broke, and what was your initial reaction?
We're talking about the Juan Pablo Valette trade
that every Nets fan would headline it as.
It's amazing that guy somehow
gets
in the mix time and time again. He's been the gift that just keeps on giving. I, like every other net enthusiast, was surprised by the timing and also by the haul, what the Nets ended up getting in this deal with the New York Knicks. It's a reminder in the NBA, there are stories that get leaked. There are stories that have legs. And then there are some stories that we do not know much about. And then, boom, it happens. And it absolutely had a domino effect, as we know, within New York City basketball. Look at it on 2 levels. First, for the Nets, I think it was a no-brainer. It was an offer that they couldn't refuse. This was a Godfather type offer when they had a chance to look to the future and get their picks back. That was the whole key. The key is controlling your picks now for the next couple of years in 2 drafts that, by all accounts, are very deep and have a chance to have major impact on your franchise. And then the second part was the plan of what it was they wanted to be. You look back to last season, the team was in the hunt for the 9 spot, the 10 spot, the play-in, and they did not have a very good season. It was underwhelming in the second half of the year. Fun group early. Erik, as you know, you were always there and always in the middle of things, analyzing and asking excellent questions along the way. They had a little spunk to them early. They had a likability factor, and then obviously the bottom dropped out coaching change, major decisions about the future of the organization had to be made. And this was a very obvious change.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that this wasn't part of their philosophy. I think they truly were evaluating what they had and what they could be moving forward. The second part of it was the Mikal part.
Mm-hmm.
And look, by all intents and purposes, he was given the keys to the car. And ultimately, it didn't go the way that he would have hoped. It didn't go the way that the team would have hoped. And now he finds himself in a really good situation where he doesn't have to lead. He doesn't have to be the guy. He can fit in very nicely, and he will fit in nicely, in my estimation, with the Knicks. And the Nets now have a lot of capital to build on here for the next several years.
Now, this is the first trade that the Nets have made with the Knicks since
Yep.
1983, and you have been with the Nets since '94, so this predates even Iron Eagle. So, were did you ever think that we would see the Nets and the Knicks make a trade of any significance, let alone a trade of this magnitude?
I would tell you that the old school version of me would 100% agree with you that those two teams would not do business. It just was not set up for that, because the Nets were always trying to be relevant and were attempting to make some kind of mark within Knicks country. I just don't think the Nets would ever view that as an option. But we're in a new NBA. And in the new NBA, with the Nets now in Brooklyn as opposed to New Jersey, which was the majority of my time prior to the Nets making the move, I do think things have changed. And I do think Sean Marks and the Tsai family believe that if they can get this going in the right direction, that Brooklyn is a place where they can attract free agents and big names and make moves, as they've shown in previous years with the iteration that we saw KD, Kyrie, and Harden, that in the right circumstances, they can build a team again, and they can do it separate from the New York Knicks, not in the shadow of the New York Knicks. Here's the reality. This was the best deal for the Nets. This was the best trade option, and they took it. And I 100% believe in what Sean Marks said, that this happened very rapidly, and they had their ducks in a row, and they were ready to pull the trigger once they realized that the Knicks were serious about this, that they saw Mikal Bridges as a missing piece. And then obviously to get those picks back for the upcoming draft in 2025 and 2026 played a huge role.
Now, want to get into your career as a broadcaster. Obviously, you have Syracuse ties. I was at Syracuse for a year, so I'm very familiar, as I'm sure everybody is at this point, with the talent that school just continuously is able to pump out. But even maybe predating Syracuse, was there a moment where you knew that you wanted to be a play-by-play broadcaster, or when did that all kind of, click into focus for you?
Erik, I knew at a very young age, I knew at 8 years old that I wanted to do this in some form. I didn't know exactly what that role would be. At some point, I thought sports anchor locally. At other times, I thought a talk show host, and obviously play-by-play became an option for me. But I knew I wanted to do something within the business. And look, going back to those days, it was not considered a tenable job necessarily. I had really supportive parents when I sprung the news on them in 1977 that this is what I wanted to do. They both said, well, then that's what you'll do. So when you're a young kid and you're encouraged to pursue it, to dream about it, and to actually go and do it, you believe that you can do it. And even though I didn't do much about it, I like a lot of kids would broadcast in my bedroom, baseball cards. If I was playing pickup basketball, I would do play by play. I would consume as much as I could at that time. We're talking about the 70s into the 80s. I didn't have cable TV. I lived in Forest Hills, Queens, and there was a huge dispute. It was political in nature that they weren't going to rip up the streets to put in cable TV. So, it was channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13, and channel 47, Spanish, where I would watch wrestling sometimes on the weekends in Spanish. So the options were limited, but I took in as much as I could. I really was a student of it even before I got to Syracuse. I was paying attention. I was taking mental notes. And then when I got to Syracuse, I got serious about it. Not right away. I definitely freshman year was distracted in many ways. And then sophomore year really put myself out there and began to pursue it on a very serious level. Whatever I could get involved in, I did, and I made the most of those 3 years at Syracuse. Freshman year, I was still involved. I just was trying to find my way a bit.
And you said, a student of broadcasting, taking notes, even predating Syracuse, then I'm sure you had tons of guidance, at WAER and everything involved there. But was there a broadcaster growing up that you sort of found inspiration in or helped you find your voice, or you said, hey, I want to call a game like this guy?
It was Marv Albert, and it wasn't close. And there were other broadcasters that I really admired. Al Michaels and Bob Costas and Vern Lundquist are a few that come to mind. Brent Musburger I would put on that list as well. Locally, growing up in New York, Marv was doing the Knicks. He was doing the Rangers. He was doing the 6 and 11 o'clock news. He would pop up on the weekends doing boxing or doing the NFL on NBC. He was doing baseball pregame shows. He was doing it all. And I was mesmerized by the fact that this guy could be in so many places seemingly at once and do his job at such a high level. I appreciated his style, which also incorporated some humor and sarcasm and busting chops of his analyst. And it all resonated with me that was a certain style that I thought was worth emulating. And look, as you advance on in the business and you try to figure out what your voice is, I will admittedly tell you, when I started doing play-by-play, I was just doing a knockoff. I wouldn't even say a bad knockoff. It was a pretty good knockoff of Marv. His delivery, his voice tenor in many ways, and certainly using a lot of his vocabulary. And then you, at some point, figure out, and this was back in my college days, I did figure out I needed to develop my own style and started to do that, trusting my instincts and figuring out how to do it and how to be successful at it and how to throw yourself, immerse yourself in it. That was what really took me to another level when I realized that it was a blank canvas and it was up to me to come up with sayings and phrases. And it's something to this day, all these years later, that still drives me to be creative and to be in the moment. I think that's a huge key in play-by-play. You can call a game and you can hover above it, or you can be in it, where every play is registering to you in some manner. And what I've realized in play-by-play, and I didn't know this right away, but over time I figured it out, your job, certainly on the TV side, is to pick out the most important part of the play in front of you. You could line up 100 broadcasters and have a game in front of them, and they may have 100 different versions of what they're seeing. And I think how you may separate yourself is, are you prioritizing what the most important thing is in what just happened? And in the NBA, when things are happening very quickly, you don't have a lot of time to think. You don't have a lot of time to ponder. You don't have a lot of time to pick and choose what you want to say and how you want to say it. So there is a bit of innate ability that comes into it, and then automatic pilot of, I've done this so many times and I've gotten so many reps. Can you say the right thing in that moment that you're proud of when the game's over, or when they play the highlight 10 years later? Or I still hear Nets highlights from way back when, from the 90s. And I think to myself, I was very young and I was trying to figure it out, but I'm proud of how I handled myself and how I've evolved over the years in doing this job.
On that note, you say you heard back a lot of your stuff. Do you have a favorite call of all time of yours, in whether in the NBA, Nets, college, basketball, football, whatever? Do you have one call that is kind of your proudest?
I don't have one specific call that I say to myself, man, I hope they put that on my tombstone. I don't think it's going to say Iron Eagle, RIP, and Jawbreaker, but that one, for whatever
That one
reason,
stuck.
that one seemed to catch fire. It was a bit of a perfect storm in many ways. When John Morant broke into the NBA, I found his name obviously very different and unique. And early on his rookie year, when he played the Nets, he actually had some strong performances. And I definitely used Ja Rule at some point, and a variation of his first name. But because I wasn't doing a whole lot of Memphis Grizzly games, I held out a bit on Jawbreaker. I had it in the back of my mind. It was marinating, but I never used it. And that particular play in the playoffs against the Minnesota Timberwolves, he just got this running start at the end of the third quarter and threw it down, and you could feel it. It was building. They were on a run. So it was at the end of this run, and it was at home. So you had the crowd behind it. And it came into my head literally as he's putting the ball into the hoop. And it was something that I had tossed around for a few years, and that's what came out, Jawbreaker, and my phone lit up like a Christmas tree.
And, on that note, catchphrases, puns, wordplay, has been a staple of your call. And Nets fans, I've been watching the Nets since I was a kid. Grew up
Yeah.
on That's a Man's Jam, Major Rack Attack, Razzle Dazzle among those. And then some of the puns, I heard Swatanabe and Gatanabe were two. One that cracked me up last season was against Portland. Anthony Simons had a corner three, airballed it. We got Simon Says airball. And dare I say, we may have even gotten a few against Toronto with Grady Dick, every announcer's favorite player of late. But, you just touched on it a little bit. Are these things that you're workshopping, leading up to games, or are they off the cuff, or is it somewhere in the middle sometimes?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination. Certainly there are times where something sticks with me in the preparation process, and I think to myself, ooh, that could work. But what I've learned through the years is, don't force it. If it doesn't fit, don't go with it. Save it, use it for another time. And then there are moments where it really is spontaneous combustion in many ways. Something triggers a thought, a phrase, and I've learned to trust my instincts. And that doesn't happen overnight. Now, look, Erik, I worked with the great Bill Raftery for so many years on Nets games, and I really learned a great deal from him. He was so sneaky clever and would surprise you often with wordplay, with a phrase, with his inflection. And I was sitting back doing my job. I was trying to build credibility. I was young. I looked younger than I was, so I was young. And then I basically wore glasses because without them, I'm not sure they would have let me into the arena. That was a legitimate concern when I got the job on television. And I've never done a game without glasses on. I just got used to the look. I wasn't wearing glasses before it. And I literally started. Now, I had poor vision, so I required the glasses. I just decided that I was going to start out with glasses and see if that would be my look, which it ended up becoming. But it was just because I was so damn young,
Mhm.
and Bill was so welcoming and such a great partner. I learned a lot just by osmosis being around him, and probably the thing I learned the most was have fun, do this job. People can tell if you're enjoying it, and you can't fake that. That's a real authentic thing, and I'd like to think doing this job for as many years that I have, people that do watch consistently know that I'm excited to be there. I'm excited to do this job. I'm excited to put the headset on. It doesn't matter the team's record. Of course, it's easier when the team is highly competitive. And a few years ago, when the Nets were getting so much attention, I found that the calls were getting a lot of attention because
Mhm.
the Nets were one of the teams that people consumed on League Pass and all other forms. When Jason Kidd came to the Nets, that was a huge pivotal moment in my broadcasting career because for many of those years, Raph and I were doing the games in relative anonymity. And all of a sudden, people around the league started to care and take notice, and the highlights would actually air on the highlight shows. I've done voice work for the NBA for nearly 30 years.
Mhm.
And a lot of that voice work was highlight based, where I would do a top 10 list and the top 10 highlights of the week. And I would think to myself for many years, man, the Nets are never on this list. And things changed dramatically when Kidd was there, and RJ and Kittles and Van Horn and eventually Vince, Kenyon Martin.
Mhm.
All of that changed. So there is a cause and effect. But I have learned, including the 12 and 70 season, it should not affect the way you do the game. You still have to bring enthusiasm, energy, information, and passion to the job. And that translates when people are tuning in, no matter what the circumstances may be.
And you talk about enthusiasm, passion, all of those things. Something that I've always noticed about the Nets, the Yes
Yeah.
broadcast, and this isn't just you, that this is everybody. The enthusiasm doesn't, wane. If
No.
it's the other team hitting the big shot, if it's the Nets hitting the big shot, it's always maintained. And I've seen the Nets lose a lot of games at the buzzer over the years, and
Yeah.
your enthusiasm always matches where it would be if the Nets were winning. And that's not something that you can say about a lot of broadcasts in the
No.
NBA. I remember when the Nets had their 25-point fourth quarter comeback in Sacramento in, I think, 2019, that
Yeah.
was. The Kings announcers sounded like they wanted to crawl under a rock when Rondae Hollis Jefferson laid that layup in. So, just where does that come from? Not just you, but the whole Yes
Yeah.
broadcast, the ability to be unbiased and the ability to deliver, a highlight or a game-winning call with that same amount of passion, even if it's your team just kind of going down in flames there.
Eric, it starts with your bosses, believe it or not. You have to know that they have your back and that they believe that the professional way to do this job is to not necessarily be down the middle. Of course, if you're the net broadcaster, there is more enthusiasm when the Nets are playing at a high level. But if it's a great NBA play, I just learned very early on in my career, the Nets weren't very good. They were winning 30 games a season. They fell off even from that when John Calipari came on board. And then we saw a little bit of an uptick when the Nets made the playoffs at the 8th seed and lost to the Chicago Bulls. That was in Calipari's second year. So the 97-98 season. But those first 3 years of doing the Nets games, there were a lot of highlights from the other team.
Mm.
And I just thought to myself, if it's a great NBA play, it's still my job to impart the emotion of that moment. And if there's a fan watching, if I'm not the conduit that I am supposed to be from what's happening on the court to somebody in their living room or somebody in their car, then I'm not doing my job. I recognize from market to market it might be different. And New York is a bit different in that I think you do have a certain integrity in the market, and there's a level and a standard with fans, not every fan, but most fans, that they recognize that, hey, got to respect when someone does something exceptional. If I had to rate it, I would tell you that on a game winner for an opponent, I still get to an 8 or a 9. Maybe it's not quite that next level, that 10, but it's still enthusiastic. There was a Paul George game winner a few years ago.
It's the one I thought about when I was
Yep.
reading this. 20
Yep.
point fourth quarter comeback. First
Yep.
one in my head.
You can't, in my mind, you can't dismiss that. You can't just push that to the side as an announcer and pretend it didn't happen. So for me, I recognize that there are some fans that say, I'd rather have all Homer all the time, that mirrors their emotions. I think most still want a enthusiastic and a call that matches the moment. If Joe Johnson is making game winners, I'm going to get there. That Ryan Ruocco is going to get there. That Noah, my son, is going to get there, or Chris Sheehan or Grady previously, now with Minnesota. We're going to get there. But I do think there's something to be said for imparting the emotion of a moment, no matter who makes the shot or who makes the block or who makes the play. There are levels to it, and you have to be smart and you have to be able to read the room. I've really tried hard to walk that line in the right manner.
And you just spoke about the first few years after you started working for the Nets. Not a lot of highlights coming from the Nets, and I want to delve into a little bit of Nets history here. You get the job in '94 radio, and you're calling games featuring guys like Derek Coleman, Kenny Anderson, Chris Childs, amongst others. Then there's a kid named Kobe Bryant coming out in the 1996 draft, and John Calipari is the newly hired head coach of the Nets. And the legend is he's ready to take Bryant at 8th overall after a workout where he just destroyed a couple of guys who were already on the Nets team. But apparently Bryant and his agent tell the Nets that he won't play for him, that he won't play for New Jersey. And eventually they pass on him, ends up going to LA. What do you remember about Kobe and the Nets during that draft? And as his star was rising, how often did you think about what could have been?
I thought about it all the time. And as the story goes, I think, have most of it correct. My understanding was John Nash, who was the GM of Nets, he stood very firm in telling John Calipari, look, don't take the cheese. He's going to play for us. If we take him, he's going to play for us. The kid wants to play in the NBA. Arn Tellem was Kobe's agent and continued to send the message to the Nets, hey, he'll go to Italy. He's comfortable there. He speaks fluent Italian. He has no problem going there. He's not going to play for you guys. This was John Calipari's first major decision as an NBA head coach and running basketball operations. So think about the position he was in that moment, that he knew everybody in the league was watching. And if he tosses an air ball and the guy that he says is going to change the franchise doesn't ever play for the franchise, he might look at that as irreparable. And that was his thought process. But ultimately, again, who knows? We had an interview. Mike Crispino was our sideline reporter. Kobe Bryant and Stephon Marbury had a duel for the ages. And Kobe leads the Lakers to victory in overtime. And we get Kobe Bryant postgame, which is not all that common that you get the star on the other team. But by the way, that was a thing in the NBA for many years. You had first choice, and if it was a superstar, you took the superstar, because how often did at that point the New York audience get to hear Kobe Bryant? And Mike Crispino asked him point blank, would you have signed with the Nets if they drafted you? And he smiled and he gave a little bit of background, my agent, and he said, but yeah, I would have. And the Nets would have won tonight.
Oh,
Tremendous answer.
yeah. That's a Kobe answer if I've ever heard one.
Completely. So who knows? I mean, the story goes that they already had a deal done with the Lakers. They were looking at the marketing possibilities. They were looking at Hollywood and Kobe becoming not just a basketball star, but beyond, which he did. And it all worked out in the career of Kobe Bryant. It all worked out for the LA Lakers, traded Vlade Divac to Charlotte, and the rest is history. But what would the Nets have been if Kobe Bryant was a Net and won titles in New Jersey and changed the course of history? You and I might not be talking right now. That's a distinct possibility, just based on how all of this might have changed basketball as we know it.
So you were saying that Nash wanted to take him despite,
Yes.
and Calipari went against that?
I'm saying that I know John Nash from his Philly days, Washington days. He had a deep Philadelphia connection. He knew that Kobe Bryant was going to be a star, and I believe John Calipari knew it as well. I do think Cal wanted to take him, but I do think he got cold feet based on what could have happened if Kobe didn't sign with the Nets. And this was Calipari's first major decision, as we know, the 1996 NBA draft. It was held, by the way, at the Meadowlands. It was in New Jersey. And they took Kerry Kittles, who turned out to be an excellent pro and did some great things for the Nets and their organization, was a terrific guy as well. But it was Kobe Bryant. And I think if John Nash had his way, yes, they would have taken him and they would have tested Arn Tellem and Kobe's camp to see if they really were going to hold out and play in Italy.
Talk about a sliding doors moment, but the Nets
Crazy.
are, after that, they're pretty bad through the late 90s. Then they trade Stephon Marbury for Jason Kidd during the 2001 offseason. You touched on this briefly before, but first, what do you remember about that trade and your reaction to the deal at that time?
I remember that Stephon, I think, needed to go, that it wasn't working. He had a dream of playing in the New York area. His dream was not to play for the Nets, although he was excited about it from the previous spots he had been in, the Minnesota thing, as we know. Everyone thought that was it. He and KG were going to win titles. And when that soured and he wasn't happy in Minneapolis, this seemed like a good fit. And I think he believed at the time that it would be a good fit. They just didn't have enough talent. They didn't have enough around him. Steph, terrific player, really gifted, one of the best one-on-one players that I've ever seen. But it was time. He needed a fresh start. Kid obviously needed a fresh start after some things that happened in Phoenix on the personal side. And then professionally, I think he needed a restart, and it gave him fuel because everybody looked at the Nets as NBA Siberia, that you wanted no part of being in New Jersey. And he said, basically, no, I can win here and I will. And I remember the first interview he did, he was very calm, very confident, and very matter of fact, saying that they would win, that they would. He didn't say, hey, we're winning 50 games, we're winning the East, none of that. But he did say, we're going to win games here. And the reaction for the most part was snickering, because the team was really bad the year before. He changed everything. It was a metamorphosis of epic proportions. I had never experienced anything like that. Even the year the Nets made the playoffs as the 8 seed with Cassell and Kendall Gill, and a good group, by the way. Jason Williams, nice team, fun team, team on the rise, but they couldn't sustain it. It fell apart the next year. It was a lockout year. They got off to a terrible start. Calipari gets fired, and then they really just went into the black hole. Jason Kidd changed the whole franchise, how they were perceived, how they were seen, and I had never witnessed anything like that. I really look back and think to myself, I had a front row seat of something that was pretty astronomical in NBA circumstance. You just don't see that kind of jump like the Nets made. Worst to first is a theory, and in other sports we see it. It's rare you see it in the NBA. Normally there are steps, and for them to get the 1 seed, to find a way in that first round series when it was still best of 5. The last year it was best of 5 against Reggie Miller and the Pacers, and then continue to win Charlotte, Boston, and then obviously we know just didn't have the horses against the Lakers, got swept in that series, and then came back and did it again, won 10 games in a row in the postseason the following year, which is an incredible feat when you think about it, and really had a chance against San Antonio. I think back, there were a couple of moments that if it just goes a little bit this way, you might be talking about an NBA championship. It was a winnable series for them. And then they never quite got back there. Vince certainly helped bring some juice to the franchise. Him, RJ, that group was a lot of fun with J Kidd, but they never quite got back to that level. There was that one series with Detroit where they still had a chance. They still had that opportunity to be the team in the East, and it was the passing of the torch that year. There was a play very late in Game 6 with the Nets up 3-2 in that series, where Richard Hamilton anticipated a pass, steal, layup. Nets did not recover, and then Game 7 was unfortunately an abomination.
And, talking about, just Jason Kidd's impact on the Nets, obviously, like you laid it out perfectly there, but really few players in the NBA have transformed a team in just one season to the next the way that he did, going from 26 wins to 52 wins and a finals appearance 2 years in a row. And, I grew up in New Jersey. It predates me a little bit. I was born in 98, but I've watched all the highlights. I've rewatched all the playoff games, but some of these kids, I have a younger brother who's 17. Some of these kids who are younger than him might not know, what Jason Kidd was, or fully be able to grasp that. You had a front row seat. Your job was literally to describe what was happening. How would you describe just the control, the impact, not just, as in all facets of the game without even scoring? How would you describe, the kind of aura that Kidd had on the court?
Erik, he just had complete command of every situation that he faced and the team faced. He was always interesting as a leader because out in the open, he was not very vocal, and you would question a bit with him that he was playing the game in his head often, and he was making his teammates better. Clearly, he was bringing them with him literally on the break. You had to run. RJ, Kenyon Martin, Kittles, the three of them benefited the most by the presence of Jason Kidd. But the more you talk to people and the more that I remember, there was a fire within that was very much on display behind the scenes. And he was stoic, and he probably kept a lot of stuff inside for the public view. When he spoke, it mattered, and he didn't have to raise his voice necessarily. And it's been interesting to watch him as a head coach and how he's changed and evolved. I just know from our production meetings, if you do a national game, you get a chance to talk to the head coaches. And I had him when he was in Brooklyn and when he was in Milwaukee. and then later with Dallas. And his evolution, even in those meetings, has been quite stark in how he processes and now how he interacts. I just think he's found a comfort zone in who he is and what he's all about. And I think he does things on his terms and on his clock. But man, from a basketball standpoint, he was a genius. He was a genius player. He did things that I just had not seen. And look, I grew up at a time, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, I was not broadcasting, I was a fan. It's a little different when the headset is on and you are paying attention to every small detail that a player brings to the floor. And with Jason Kidd, I felt like I was basically getting a doctorate in play-by-play because he was doing things that I had to be completely open to as an announcer, that I've never described this, I've never seen it. I've got to have something up my sleeve and ready to go because he's going to do something that is out of this world.
Is there one play that sticks out to you that you remember just as, as it was happening? Like, what did he just do? How did he do that? Something you had never seen before, like an example?
Yeah, he took a particular glee and joy in beating the Knicks, especially at the Garden. And he had a bowling ball pass to Richard Jefferson that I just had not seen before. Hadn't seen it. I've seen it since, and I've seen others try to do it. It was perfect. Perfect. The exact amount of spin necessary, the lead to get RJ to the spot, and it was at the Garden. So to do it on that stage, look at his record, look at the team's record during his tenure as a player with the Nets against the New York Knicks. It was as lopsided as you can get in a league where we know things happen, guys have nights off or back to back, whatever it might be. They always got up for the Knicks, and RJ and Kidd both really took it personally. He had a couple others, blind shot against, I believe, the Chicago Bulls that I don't know where that came from. And I think that might have been my call. Like, Jason Kidd is a magician because he really was a magician.
Yeah, and you touched on RJ. Speaking of guys who just loved beating up on the Knicks, but going down the line, RJ, Vince Carter, guys who really became staples of the Nets alongside Kidd, are reunited as part of the Yes team this past season. What was it like having those two guys, just around and back together again?
Very cool. With RJ, it's been a couple of years, first foray into broadcasting, and I have now gotten to know him on a whole other level. Remember, he was a kid when he got to the Nets. He was young, he was cocky, he backed it up. He liked to mess with people. He still likes to mess with people, but what I learned about him was his intelligence level, which is off the charts. He's natural on the air. He's got unique insight. He's funny as all hell. And it's a blast doing games with him. We have no idea where it's going to go. We do not talk about anything prior to the game. Everything that we're doing is in the moment. Everything that we're doing is based on trust and humor. And I've really had nothing but absolute entertaining time with RJ on the mic. Vince, who I knew a bit more, Vince as a player was the guy that got on the bus and was smiley and asked you how you doing and had a natural curiosity about things. So Vince was different as a player. So then when Vince went into the broadcasting side, I would see him. He was doing stuff for the Hawks. He was bopping around a little bit for ESPN. He did some stuff for Turner as well. And then when he signed on with the Nets, it really felt like a very seamless transition. Vince is a guy that works so hard on his game for so long and has such respect among his peers and younger players. I can't tell you how many guys come over to talk to him, to say hello, to just shake his hand, because I think he really had a serious impact on a generation of NBA talent. And then as an analyst, his affability comes through. You can feel his smile when he's doing the games. He loves being there. He loves doing it. I think getting him into the Yes family has been great for his career because it's been a new perspective. And Frank DeGrace, our producer, who's, in my estimation, the best guy out there doing it, knows how to work with analysts, knows how to work with talent, and finds those places where he can give feedback. And I saw improvement from game one to the end of the season with Vince that was pretty impressive. And I just see that continuing to go in an upward motion. He wants to be great at this, and anything that he's wanted to be great at, he's been great at.
And, you talk about those two guys, but I just, we're closing it out here, but I just wanted the overall talent on the Yes broadcast. I mean, in addition to those guys that we just talked about, you have guys like Ryan Ruocco, Michael Grady, who's since moved on to Minnesota, Sarah Kustok on color, Chris Sheeran, Frank Isola in the booth,
Yeah.
and then even the radio broadcast with Carino and Capper, who are just unbelievable. Like, does it ever amaze you the sheer volume of talent that is involved with the broadcast for this Nets organization?
I'm really proud of it, Eric. I'm proud of the association. I'm proud of the standard that we have, and that's been passed on from generation to generation in many ways, from play-by-play to analysts. To see Sarah Kustok now have the career that she's put together, the fact that she's one of the most respected analysts in the sport. This was someone who brought so much joy to the job, and her insight and her whole approach to doing it has been appreciated on all levels, locally, nationally. There's a reason why she is sought after, and there's a reason why you're going to see her in bigger spots doing this job for a very long time. And a lot of credit has to be given to management at Yes Network, cultivating talent, believing in talent. Mark Jackson, Pryor, Mike Fratello, Marv Albert, Kelly Tripucka, on and on. It's been Donnie Marshall was a part of it, Greg Anthony, Jim Spinarkle. These are high-level broadcasters, and I give Yes a great deal of credit for putting a premium on having the best people to do this job. And that's why it's been such a great association for me. I'm now 30 years into doing Nets games. It's been 1 year on radio, 29 years on TV. It was Sports Channel at one point. It was Fox Sports New York. It was under the MSG umbrella for a number of years. My checks were from MSG. And when Yes got involved, we had no idea if they would maintain it. Well, they haven't just maintained it. They've taken it up a few notches.
And last thing to close this out, obviously, voice of the Nets, now voice of March Madness. You have the NFL stuff. What does the future hold for Iron Eagle? How long are we expecting this to go out? Could there, potentially be a talk show somewhere in the future? Like, what are some goals, and how are you looking at this next phase of your career in broadcasting?
Main goal now is to call pickup hoops in Fire Island.
I was gonna ask. I've had a few requests already out here. You got to ask him. And I was like, it could be on the horizon. Who knows?
If you could find a way, a collection to get to a point where you can pay my fee, I'll show up. It's not a problem.
All right.
Look, the reality for me is I'm living out a dream. I'm doing all the things that I hoped I would do in this career. I've done things that I never imagined that I would do in my career. And the way I would answer it is I'm open to the possibilities, but I do appreciate what I have, and I always have. And that's a big key in this business. When I show up to do this job, I have given everything that I have in terms of preparation, in terms of being a good teammate, in being collaborative in what I do, and bringing the right attitude. And that will never go away. That's the only way I know how to do it. And if it's done at a different place for a different sport, that will never change. I will never alter that mentality. So who knows? Who knows what pops up in the next few years? But I'm open to all of it.
Ryan, I had a lot of anticipation to having you on from listeners. Everybody wanted to hear what you had to say, and I'm sure everybody will enjoy this. You know, you're a staple of the Nets organization, and through the ups and the downs, the broadcast has always been something that all Nets fans, I think, can lean on, and everybody appreciates the work you do. And I really appreciate you for taking the time today, man. Thank you.
Erik, you got it. My pleasure. I'm going to leave you with this one last thought in regards to the 2024-25 Nets. I do think there's been a reaction to what the Nets did and a perception that they're in full tank mode and it's all about just accumulating as many losses as possible to put yourself in a position to get the highest draft pick possible. Well, two things on that. One, as of right now, as the team is currently constituted, there have not been across the board changes. There's been one major change, and of course, it's Mikal Bridges. But the rest of the team is still intact. That doesn't mean they're going to be intact for the remainder of the season. But for now, this roster still mirrors the roster that we saw last year. The second part, things have changed with the draft lottery, and it's not a simple equation anymore. Just lose as many games as possible, and it puts you in the best position to get the number one overall pick. The ping pong balls are a little different. The way that they've been set up is a little bit different. And with this coaching staff, with Jordi Fernandez, with what I know about him, his ability to communicate and his acumen, I don't think this team is just going to lay down. I don't think these players are going to lay down. You can't tell Cam Thomas to not score.
Nope.
This is all he knows how to do. The man goes to a gym and he scores. He could average 30 points per game this season. It's possible. I'm not saying it will happen. It's possible. We don't know what this team is going to look like come All-Star break, trade deadline, all of those factors. But the idea that this is a 10, 12 win team, that's not how I view it. They will compete. And of course, they're going to be roster challenged compared to most of the NBA. And odds are you can probably write them in for 40 losses right now. What do you do with the other 42 games?
Mm-hmm.
And that comes down to coaching. It comes down to strategy. It comes down to these young guys. You know, they do believe that Noah Clowney is going to take a step. They believe that Nick Claxton has more to what we've seen. And that's why they rewarded him with the deal. And he's also an asset. You have no idea moving forward. But I've done a 12-70 season. This is not a 12-70 team as currently constituted.
Okay, you heard it there, Nets fans. Not a 12-70 team, and there are more possibilities potentially than people are acknowledging on the horizon for Brooklyn. And I'm excited to see how it plays out, and I'm excited to get your thoughts in the future on that, man. So thank you.
All right, Erik.
That does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Hope you guys really enjoyed the interview with Ian. Just, you know, such a staple of the Nets organization and honestly a transcendent figure in the broadcasting world. So it was amazing to have him on and get to talk some Nets. As I said at the top, if you guys don't already, make sure to subscribe to Believe in Nets on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Follow my YouTube channel at Erik Slater. Smash that like button. Leave a 5-star review if you can. really goes a long way. We got some more coming up in the Nets offseason. We got Summer League coming up this week. Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead, some other signings are going to try to flash their potential there. And then we also have a lot more, transactions, a lot more work to do with this roster, as I said at the top. So I'll have more coverage of all of that here on Believe in Nets. Talk to you guys soon.